I hope that you're looking forward to this study again this evening as we talk about marriage and the home. Yesterday we went over the basics of a godly marriage, or God's intent as He designed marriage, and tonight we want to look a little bit more in depth. Obviously, with what we're going through this week, people have written books on each of these subjects, and so we're scratching the surface, but I hope that it is thought-provoking and that is encouraging to you and maybe uplifting to you in some way. I want to begin this evening kind of where we started out yesterday evening, starting in Genesis 2 and verse 18. As a reminder, whenever God created marriage, He said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I'll make him an help meet for him." And so what God did is He created marriages. He wasn't creating the ball and chain. He wasn't creating an outdated, something that would eventually become antiquated. He was creating a blessing for mankind, for men and for women. And I believe that our marriage should be a blessing. And brothers and sisters, if our marriage is going to be a blessing, that means that work has to go into it. And above all, the work that goes into it has to be by following God's plan and His desires and design for our marriage. I want to talk a little bit this evening about leaving and cleaving. Now, leaving and cleaving is something that we find right here in Genesis chapter 2. As He creates a marriage, He said, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." We're going to read it from several different places in the Scriptures this evening. But I want you to know, I think this is one of the most underrated and fundamental aspects of marriage. Now, I don't think that we forget to talk about it. I hear people talk about it all the time. I think a lot of times as people are about to get married, we talk about, now listen, you've got to leave and you got to cleave, and that's a part of it. But when you look in the world around you, I think one of the very first problems that some marriages, obviously not everyone, encounter is that they aren't willing to leave and cleave. And whenever we don't do that, I think it's a hindrance to our marriage. So I want to look at this a little bit this evening, the idea of leaving and cleaving and how it contributes to the blessing that a marriage can be, how it contributes to other relationships in life, and how it can make us to be more united inside of our own home. The idea of leaving and cleaving is one that we can look at the relationship of the church and Christ, and we could see that it is present there. Ephesians 5, a lot of times we go there to talk about marriage, where marriage is there used as an analogy for Christ and the church. He says in Ephesians 5 and 31, "For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh." And he says, this is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. So as he teaches us important principles about marriage, he's saying, but like so many other things, the fullness is Christ. So this is a shadow, but the fullness is of Christ. And so what I think we can do as we look at leaving and cleaving our marriage is we look, what does it mean in the church? What does it mean whenever I leave this world behind for the church? Because that's what he's trying to preach at, right? Whenever I leave for Christ, what does He ask me to do? Colossians 3, 5 through 7, for our marriage for Christ, maybe we got to leave behind sin, or for sure we do. "Mortify or kill therefore your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, covetousness, which is idolatry, for which things' sake the wrath of God cometh on the children of disobedient, in the which ye also walked sometime when ye lived in them." We could go through all of these things. Not we're going to do that. I use this as an example to show you what Christ expects from you and me. If we want to be a part of His bride as the church, He said you're going to have to cast some things off. In fact, here He says, kill them. You look at Romans chapter 6, and what he tells them, should we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. So whenever we leave for our relationship with Christ, what we leave, in part, is the sins of our past life. Cast it off. Put it away. Kill it. We understand this concept of Christians. Sometimes, whenever we're leaving Christ, we might even have to leave behind the importance of some of the other relationships in life. In Luke chapter 14, verse 26, Jesus said, "If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple." And I'm sure you heard this over and over. I don't know why, but it's one of my favorite words to talk about. Whenever we read this word hate not here, so many people look at it and go, whoa, I thought God is the God of love, and He is. You get the definition, and that word hate there is simply loveless. And what he is teaching here is if we truly want to follow Jesus, what we have to be able to do with other relationships in life is to place them on a different plane than where we place our king, to where we place our husband, so to speak, in Christ. And so he says, if you want to be my bride, what you have to do is you need to come and make sure that your father's second, that your mother's second, that your wife is second, that your children are second. And what we know about that is if we're truly putting God first, that even though we love them less than we do God, they're not going to suffer. They're not going to be hurting for love in that relationship, because God teaches how to be fulfilling to all of those relationships, even though He is first. And I believe this is a principle that we learn as we look at Christ and the church, and is very similar, obviously, to what we have in a marriage. Whenever Jesus tells us to leave and cleave, it's for our benefit. And I would submit to you that it's not a take it or leave it kind of commandment. It's not a take it or leave it kind of design, but it's something that we need to put a lot of thought and probably a lot of energy into. In Genesis chapter 2 and 24, He says, "For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, will cleave to his wife, and they shall be one flesh." After Adam and Eve were created, obviously they didn't have a mother and father to leave from, but from that point on, starting with their children forward, as relationships were started, they had to be able to put some other relationships after their spouse. Their children would have to do that. Now, sometimes we state leave and cleave, and I watch people go, "Oh yeah, we got to leave, we got to cleave. I mean, we can't just be living with mommy and daddy for the rest of our life." And I think that there's a lot of different things that go behind this teaching. We'll talk about some of them, but I think it's harder than what we first think about. I think that it's not just like a lot of scriptures. It's not something that we just say, yeah, we can do this, and we put our mind to it, and all of a sudden, with one ceremony, immediately we're able to leave and cleave the way that we need to for our marriage. I'll tell you one of the reasons why I think that is, what do you spend your life doing as a child? The beginning of your life, maybe the first 16, 17, 18 years, you spend your life in submission to someone else. In fact, children, if you're paying attention, if you want to know how to please God, we'll talk more about this in your childhood. One of the most basic things you can do to make God happy is this verse, Colossians 3 and 20, "Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing unto the Lord." Leaving and cleaving is a difficult task because you're programmed for years to obey your authority, right? So you obey your parents. They tell you what to do. They tell you where you can go, when you can go there, when you can't go, why you can and why you can't, why you should and why you shouldn't, and a whole bunch of other things in between. And not only all the control that they have because God has placed them as authority in your life, but you build relationships with them. I mean, don't you? They're the people you confide in. Whenever you have your heartaches, who do you go to? A lot of times you go to your folks. Whenever something good happens in your life, when you win that baseball trophy or whatever, where do you go? You go show it to your folks. And you spend years and years building those relationships. And we're expected to just leave and cleave like that? It takes work. Because rightly so, your parents build bonds with you. And what happens as we get married is we need to be able to transition those bonds to our spouse. That's what leaving and cleaving is. It's not just about walking away. It's about placing that trust, placing your emotional confidence, placing the situation where you confess all your faults and get all your praise and your encouragement. It should come from your spouse. Sometimes it's difficult. I'll tell you what I can't tell you. What I don't know from experience is what it is like to give away my child. Like I said yesterday, my kids are 10 and 6. Tori Jo, my daughter, she's the 10-year-old. There is a level of comfort as a parent in being able to safely direct her in life right now. I do the best. I ain't a perfect dad. You know, you watch me long enough and you know that, and you know, as mothers and fathers, you're not perfect, but this control that you have, it's not because you crave control and power over your children. You want the best for them. And so you spend your life saying, like we said, do this, don't do that. I don't know how hard it is going to be one of these days, Lord willing, if she finds a good man, to be able to look at a young man who comes up to me and says, if he says, I would like to marry your daughter, how I'm going to be able to handle that. You know what I'd like to think about myself? If he's a good fella, I'd like to say, you know, bless you. I'm here for you, whatever you need. I'd like to think that I'd be able to stay out of his business. But I don't know. You know what I do know? As a parent, it's awful hard for me to not want to be in the middle of my kid's business. And I think sometimes as a parent, you probably have to work at the leaving and cleaving process for the sake of your children. I think this process can be made a little bit easier by parents who are aware of that. Now, we're going to talk a lot about the kids' responsibility in that too, or the young couple's responsibility, so this ain't just a harp to the parents, but there is some responsibility where you can make it easier for your children as they start these new relationships, to encourage them to make decisions, to encourage them to place their confidence in someone else. There is stereotypes about in-laws for a reason. You know that? There's stereotypes. I mean, all stereotypes are rooted in some truth, maybe not all truth, but some truth. And I think we have to consider that to a degree. You know, how is it I can forge the best relationship that I can, where I can be a positive influence, but at the same time, they're forced to grow up and to make their decisions and to forge their relationships outside of the safety of my direction. Leaving and cleaving is difficult, not just for those getting married, but I think it's probably difficult for the folks. I got a picture in our wedding album. I don't know. I guess some guys wouldn't sift through the wedding album. Maybe you do, but I was looking through the wedding album with my kids the other day, and there's a picture of my father-in-law off in the corner at the church bin at Lubbock in a big red plush chair with the biggest piece of cake you've ever seen in your life, just eating that. You know, he was very kind to me and has been a good father-in-law in so many ways, but I know that there is some hardship that you go whenever you let go of the one you've had responsibility for years. Leaving and cleaving for the married couple is about picking up those responsibilities. Now we're going to come back to this. We're going to continue in this idea, but what I don't want to give you the idea this evening is that whenever a child leaves the home and they're now out on their own and they're married, that all of a sudden it's kicking mom and dad to the curb and there's no relationships. You know, that is one of the things that's an accusation that's leveled at a lot of people who are newly married, that they're infatuated, they're in a honeymoon phase, and it'll pass, and that people lock themselves up, you know, away from all of society. And as married Christians, I'm going to keep that there, as godly people who are married, we can't just do away with all of our relationships. And what He's not calling us to do in leaving and cleaving is just completely cut everyone out of our life. You know, you may grow up and you don't have to obey your parents anymore, but you know what? We never lose a responsibility to honor our folks. Honor our father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise. There's so many places where Jesus taught about how someone can honor their parents, and it can be in so many ways. We could go on all day, whether it's in financially helping them whenever they're in need, when maybe taking care of them when they're older. Maybe it's even talking about widows or other folks. There's responsibility towards folks in your family. I'll tell you this, you want to honor your parents? Don't make them bear the burdens of your life. You ready to get married? Be married. You ready to have a job and to raise children? Have a job, raise children. That doesn't mean that we don't ever need help in our life, but don't make them relive their life in ways. Be responsible and be ready to be responsible. I'll tell you that the Bible says that grandchildren are a crown to the grandfathers. Children are a crown to grandparents. And there's too many grandparents who aren't getting to live that grandparent life. And if you're raising your grandkids, I want to say, God bless you. It's honorable that you're taking care of them. It's honorable that you're stepping up. But I say to anyone who wants to be married, you want to honor your parents with your marriage, one of the first things you can do, grow up. Be married. Be husbands who lead. Be men who make good decisions. Be women who are able to submit and fill their roles well. Raise your kids in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord, and we'll talk about that. Be married the way God called you to. Don't place those burdens of life back on your folks. They spent their time. Let them live it up a little bit in some ways. Don't make them worry about you all the time. Boy, I just never realized how much I'd worry about kids till I got kids. Running, playing, spending all my time at the creek when I was a boy, picking up snakes, running around with guns and riding bikes, taking them off ramps, and now I see my kid take one step up on a tree, and I'm like, stop, wait, what? Yeah, bro, I see broken bones coming, I go into panic mode. And I want to protect them, and I worry about them. I don't think that'll ever go away, but you know what? The more mature that we are as we start our homes and as we labor, maybe the more ease there can be for parents. I don't know, some of you may be able to shed more light on that. I hope that's the case. I don't guess some of that worry will ever go away. But maybe we can make it a little bit easier in some ways, that they don't have to worry Maybe they don't have to worry about us financially in some ways because they know that you work hard, regardless of what you got to do, what the economy is doing. You feed your family. Maybe they don't have to worry because they know where you're going to be on Sunday. Not because your kids are worried about what you think about them and going to church or not, but because they know that you love the Lord and you're ready to serve Him with all your heart, and that you're bringing your family along in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. You have a duty to honor your folks, and there's a lot of different ways that you could do it. It's not simply by cutting them out of your life. Leaving and cleaving is about learning how to balance those relationships. You know, it's not about cutting other people out of your life completely. You know, think about the blessing that we ought to be. I like Proverbs 31. We read a lot of it about being to the virtuous woman. There's things to men and women in there. Look at these two verses. He said the virtuous woman's husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. Very similarly, at the end of the chapter, he said, give her the fruit of her hands and let her works praise her in the gates. And the idea behind this is these people are active. This husband and this wife, they're involved with the people of their community, obviously with the elders of the land. They're well known. Why? Because they're laboring. They're interactive. Yeah, your marriage ought not to just be a blessing to you, locked away, tucked away for only you to enjoy. But the gifts that God gave to you and to your talented spouse, go use them to serve in the kingdom. We read about great people in the Scriptures who did great things in God's name. I especially love the story of the different little snippets of Priscilla and Aquila, I guess. Not a lot about them there, but they played a valuable impact in the kingdom. And I know a lot of those Priscilla and Aquilas. There's a lot of them that have been involved in my life. Not just my folks, but other people. Some of you are in here, Lori and Rusty. And I don't mean to single them out, but I'm going to tell you that they played a valuable part in my life. You know when? When they had little bitty babies. And I know a lot of you have done that for others too. Our marriage ought to be a blessing to other people, not just locked away for ourselves. We still have a duty to other people. So leaving and cleaving, is it about getting away from everybody and locking up like two hermits in the middle of the woods? It's about making sure that we draw closer as a couple, we put other relationships into perspective, and we serve God with our marriage. You know, I think it's a process. It's a process that we will continue to grow in the more diligence that we place into that. Sometimes we'll do a good job. Sometimes we don't do as a good job. One of the things that he talks about in Genesis 3:16, he talks to the woman and he says, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception, and so thou shalt bring forth children, and the desire shall be to the husband, and he shall rule over thee. This may seem like an interesting place to go. You know the story that they were put in the garden. They were told that how to live their life. They were told what they could eat, what they couldn't eat, and they eventually broke that. He's handing down the punishments. He hands down a punishment to the snake. He hands out punishment to the serpent, to man and to woman here. One of the interesting pieces that I believe can play, maybe that's not all there is to it, play a piece in the leaving and cleaving process and how we think about it is the idea of her desire being to our husband. If you think about, I don't know, psychology is probably not the right word, but it makes me feel smart to say psychology. But, you know, part of the thought process behind leaving and cleaving is filling voids up. Because that's what we're talking about. The relationships that we had, they must be replaced. It's not that we can replace other people, but there are needs in people's lives that have to be filled. And so at one point where your parents were filling needs and your desire was to them, you looked to them, you reached out to them and longed for them to take care of your security and to make you feel safe and to give you what you needed in life. Now you're looking to someone else. And I would say that largely, husbands, will fall on you. As the leaders in your home, you need to make sure that you're filling the security voids in your wife's life. And we'll talk to the wives too about that in a moment, but there are needs that we have as men and women. We get them from one relationship or another, but inside of leaving and cleaving, it's a responsibility of the spouse to fill them. Now, inside of the church, who does that for us? Now, we could say in a lot of ways Christ has left the church here for us to fill that need, but everything goes back to Jesus, right? Jesus is the one who supplies our need, looking to that great husband, the perfect husband, because none of us are. But he says, Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church. He gave himself for it. One of the problems, one of the reasons why people will consistently go looking to other people for filling the needs in their life is because it's not being filled by their spouse. For instance, husbands, if your wife doesn't feel like you're going to take good care of her, I'll just go back to finances. Life isn't all about money, but let's use it. It's an easy example. If you won't keep a job, if you don't work hard, if you're lazy, you know what's it's do in your home? It's going to create instability, because mama's going to worry about those kids, and she's going to worry about, are you going to be able to keep this next job, and are we going to be able to pay the bills next month, and are we going to have enough to eat, and so on and so forth. And that insecurity builds, and it destroys trust, and it destroys oneness. And what do you do whenever you have insecurities? I don't care who you are, mom or daddy. You go find somebody that's going to make you feel a little bit safer, don't you? You confide in those people. Why? Because you feel insecure. You know what Jesus does to us? He takes our insecurities and He gives Himself over and over and over, or completely, I guess would be a better way to put it, so that we don't have to feel insecure. We know we can trust Him. We know we can count on Him. We know we can go to Him. We know He's got answers. We know He'll always be there. And so that's why we trust Jesus. And we can give ourselves to Him, or we should be able to. And as husbands, that's what we have to learn from. You want your wife to be able to completely give herself to you and not to others? Be someone she can count on. Be someone that she doesn't have to run to somebody else to fill the needs of her life. And the women can do likewise. Philippians 4:19, he says, my God will supply all your needs according to His riches in the glory by Jesus Christ. Big and small. That's what Jesus does. He supplies our needs. And in leaving and cleaving and becoming one flesh, it's a process of filling the needs of the other person so someone else doesn't have to do it. I guess one of the contentions that happen between in-laws and son-in-laws, or in-laws and daughter-in-laws, is that maybe one person inside of the marriage, they get hurt by their spouse, and what do? They go and they run and they tell mom or daddy about it, right? Their mom or daddy. And then what happens some of those times? Mom and daddy's upset at the spouse. You hurt my baby. And they say that whether it's their son or their daughter. You hurt my baby. And they're not happy. I think that's one of the ways that we dishonor our parents with our marriage sometimes, is we drag them into the middle of something they don't need to be dragged into. You know, sometimes if we work out problems the way the Bible tells us to, with our brother and sister, with our spouse, other people don't have to know about it. You know, there are lots of little problems that if we work on it, we confide in each other and we fill up the needs and we can fix the hurt ourselves and no one else knows about it. You know what? I guess I'll be practical about this. Maybe I do something to hurt my wife, hurt her feelings. I don't feel the need. I neglect her in some way. I'm going to give you a little insight, sad insight. You can smack me in the back of the head later. I've already been smacked in the back of the head. You know what I did? I forgot to tell her happy birthday till 3 o'clock in the afternoon this year. Thought about it first thing in the morning. Thought about it about halfway through the morning. Had a present ready, was all ready to go, and got distracted. Pretty easy going about those things. I'm glad she is. I didn't get the 5th degree over something like that. But you know what she could have done? She could have went and told everybody else about it, maybe even told her parents, and they could have been upset at me, and they could have held a grudge against me, not that they would. But I'm grateful that didn't turn into a process like that. I know this isn't confession hour, but there's lots of things bigger than that. You know, thankfully that was a small thing, but there's bigger things in my life that I failed at as a husband. And if she was to take all my flaws and all my failures to her folks, it puts them in a rough situation, because you know what? They're going to think, well, that boy isn't taking care of our daughter. And maybe later on, maybe even later on down the line, I could fix some of those things. And they may not know that I fixed those things, and so they still hold on to things. That's why leaving and cleaving can be important. It can protect other people. And there's another thing, I guess, that could go into this. I'm just throwing spaghetti at the wall, I guess, right now. Maybe another aspect of filling the needs in life. I'll tell you, as a man, what's important to me is that I feel like my wife trusts my judgment. You know, any husband in here, don't you feel important and you feel valuable whenever you know your wife trusts your decision-making process? But if every time your spouse, every time you said something or made a decision, they said, well, my daddy says, or my mama says, or things like that, you know what that does after a while? It makes you feel about this small. You feel like they don't trust me. They haven't left and cleft. I don't know if that's terms right there, left and cleft. Make a few up, you get my drift. But you feel like they're not completely mine. But what makes you feel like $1,000,000 as a husband is whenever you know that your wife trusts you completely. You feel good, don't you? Well, that has to be earned. That has to be worked at. That has to be built. Maybe it takes a lifetime to completely build that. No one's going to be perfect at it. We're all going to fail, husbands and wives. Wives, you can promote and build security in your home and your leaving and cleaving process too. Proverbs 31 says, the heart of her husband is safely trusting her so that he shall have no need to spoil or plunder. It means that the things that he needs, he doesn't have to go looking for it somewhere else. Why? Because you do such a good job taking care of him. There's probably a lot of spoiled men in here. I bet there are. A lot of good ladies. I don't care if you're a husband or you're a wife. Your spouse has needs. And you want to continue to grow in the leaving and cleaving process, continuing to grow in your oneness in your marriage. You look at what the other person needs and you fill that need. As best as you can, you fill that need. Fill your role. Leaving and cleaving is about thinking about somebody else over yourself. Leave no doubt of whether or not your mate can trust you. Leave no doubt on whether or not you can take care of everything for them. In Mark 10 and verse 8, Jesus was reiterating the commandment of leaving and cleaving. He said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. They twain shall be one flesh, so that there be no more twain, but one flesh. We're going to work our way into one flesh. One flesh, I believe, encompasses several different things. Inside of one flesh, you have the oneness that gives you the holiness of the marriage bed or access to a physical relationship. But even if, and I've heard a lot of people who believe that's solely what it means, that one flesh. So I'll say, okay, let's just say for a minute that maybe it is. Maybe it's the culmination of one flesh being that your body is the other person's body and their body is your body, as we'll read here in a minute. That is affected by more things than just a physical attraction. It's affected by more than just congratulations and, by the power invested in me, and I'll pronounce you man and wife. There's more factors that influence that physical relationship that you have. Oneness comes from so many different parts. Part of it is going to be the way that you're able to leave other relationships behind and promote that one person over others. And the other part of it is going to be just how close you are able to get emotionally on an intellectual level as well. I think that's important to think about. So many times before marriage, people don't think about the important questions, I guess. And I don't know, I probably couldn't tell you what all the important questions are, but it has not ceased to amaze me how many people are married a couple years before they talk about how many kids are we going to have? What church are we going to go to? Where are we going to live at? What careers are we going to have? What is the arrangement of our home? How are we going to train our children? How are we going to discipline our children? It's incredible how many people don't talk about these things. Or maybe they don't go into depth. And one of the most basic scriptures we have in Amos 3, can two walk together except they be agreed? Look, part of being one flesh and about leaving and cleaving. Cleaving means stuck together or bound together. Holding on to each other means that we need to be united in mind too. When he talks about even folks in the church, even you and I, as the collective of the church or the bride of Christ. He said, I beseech you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same thing, and there be no divisions among you, but you be perfectly joined together in the same mind and the same judgment. Even at the church, he said, I want you to be knit together in your mind. I want you to be knit together in judgments. And I want you to think about the hardships. And I hope you don't have to endure this in your marriage. I've known a lot of people who are unequally yoked. And that's a whole other discussion. I don't think unequally yoked is just a marriage scripture. But there's people who are married and they're not married up to folks that they share the same beliefs with. Maybe it's because they didn't study a lot together before they were married. Maybe because they studied before, but then they slacked off at some point in the marriage. But I'll tell you, it has got to be brutal to be married to someone that you disagree with on religion, and you disagree with on how to raise the kids, and you disagree with on how to do this financially and this educationally and where to park the car. I mean, you just find things to argue over when you're not in agreement. And part of being one flesh, at the very least, is going to start in your heart and in your mind and how close you can be there. I got a lot of good friends, a lot of great friends. A lot of people have been there for me through the years. But you know what? There is no safer place than my home. And I know that many of you probably feel the same way. Hopefully everyone does. The conversations that I can have with, the wife of my youth, my friend, they're unparalleled. I'm grateful to her for that. Being one flesh starts with getting to know the other person. We're drawn closer on a mental level and on a spiritual level. It's only going to come through drawing closer. Only the best of marriage is only going to come whenever you have got close together and unified in His Word. We expect for everything to click. I don't know, we take things for granted. We expect for everything to just work in a marriage. We start off loving each other. You're gorgeous, you're beautiful, you're pretty. I can't wait to get married, and everything's going to be wonderful, and we'll eat together, and we'll share the same bed, and we'll wake up, and your breast's going to be wonderful. And you think about all those things. Everything's going to be great before you get married, right? You have high hopes, high expectations. But we need to have the tough conversations too before we enter into that covenant. And then you don't quit. Continue to be spiritual together, whether it's service with others or your personal time, studying through the Scriptures. Talk to one another. We could spend, someone smarter than me could spend lots and lots of time just talking about the importance of communication. And I would just say to you, just think about how much communication it takes with your God to really be close with Him. It takes a lot, and it's going to take that type of communication with your spouse to make it go well. I know this, if you really want to be one flesh and you want everything to run smoothly in your marriage, don't expect for it to be because you live your life and she lives her life, or you live your life and he lives his, and that everything's just going to work out at the end of the day. You can't expect to go day in and day out and not communicate. You can't expect to just pass one another as you're coming in and out of the door and for everything to work right. You can't expect for there to always be physical attraction in your intimacy, men, whenever there's no emotional connection from your wife. And I'd say that's true probably the other way around a lot of times. We have to build this emotional connection. We have to put the energy and focus to it. Being of one mind fosters that type of unity. In Ephesians 5:25, as we've read many times over, and we're probably going to read a few more times, verse 28, here he says, "So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loves his wife loves himself, for no man ever yet hates his own flesh, but he nourisheth and he cherisheth, even as the Lord the church." Part of being one flesh means that you're going to be able to do for somebody else before you think about yourself. Whenever you're married, it's not just about you anymore. There's a lot of freedom in being single. There's a lot of freedoms. There is. You don't have to be home if you're still at home, you have to be home at a certain time. I understand that. But there's a lot of things you don't have to do. Even as you're preparing for marriage, there's still not as much as a commitment. Whenever you enter into that marriage relationship, suddenly it's not just about you anymore. Are you willing to put somebody else first? The way you take care of yourself. Maybe better than you take care of yourself. I don't know. Sometimes I'm pretty rough on myself. I was talking to Lori this evening about how I've just trashed my body with how much I love food here for the last several years. And I'm still a young guy. I don't want you to remember that. But things are changing. And I'm having to take a little bit better care of myself. The question as a husband, though, is am I willing to take better care of someone else than myself? And being one flesh is about having that mindset. We can't go into marriage continually thinking about what I need and I want. And that's not what society preaches, folks. I told you yesterday, Yahoo, it's a dangerous place. I mean, I like the Yahoo Fantasy Sports Play. That's cool. But Yahoo's it's a dangerous place, the internet, I guess, as a whole. I don't want to bash Yahoo. I was reading an article the other day where a psychologist was talking about how healthy it is for relationships for at least once a year, each person to take a separate vacation from their spouse. Well, I'm going to be honest, my first thought was, man, how do people afford that? But I got more serious and I wised up and I go, why? Why do you want to do that? How is that going to help you? How does time not spent on the other person help you with that other person? Because you don't have to deal with them anymore? Because things are already rough at home? That's what it is. People say that because they're already having a hard time, because there's already so many other things out of whack inside of their home that they just need a break from somebody. And that's not the way it ought to be inside of our homes. It's not about getting me time. It's not about you getting you time. It's about us taking care of one another. It's about us aligning our desires and aligning what we want to do and who we want to be one thought, to be one action, to be one goal. And working to make that something that's enjoyable. Even whenever it comes to our relationship with God, He teaches us this idea that we can't sit on the fence. When it comes to God, He said, no man can serve two masters. Either he'll hate the one, he'll love the other, or he'll hold the one, and he'll despise the other. You can't serve God and mammon, or physical things. And this is true inside of your marriage. You can't be all about you and all about them at the same time. You got to choose. Is it us or is it me? Is it you or is it me? And I'm going to be honest. One of the least favorite things that I'm a part of nowadays, and some of you probably been involved with that, is having to sit down with people whose marriages, they haven't got help until the last possible second, and things are looking very dire, and they come say, help me, but they don't really want help anymore, and all they can think about is what I want. Well, I know what I want, and I know what they aren't. Well, I know what I want, and I know what they won't do. I don't deserve this. I want this, I want this, I want this, and I want this. And people start laying down laws. If you want this to be good, here's what you're going to do. That's not marriage. Not a godly marriage anyways. I'll tell you what it is. It's misery. It's division that's going to cause trouble for you and for everybody else around you. It ain't fun. We have to choose to place our mate first, and that's about being one in the flesh. 1 Corinthians 7, 2 through 5, He said, nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Let the husband render unto his wife due benevolence, and likewise unto the wife unto the husband. And the wife hath not power over her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power over his own body, but the wife. Defraud you not one another, except it be with consent for a time, and that ye give yourselves to fasting and to prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you, and tempt you not for your incontinency. As he talks about one flesh, it culminates in this, the intimate relationship. It may sound cheesy, it may sound corny, but that physical relationship, Mom used to say, it's the icing on the cake. It's a blessing. People joke about it, you know. People joke about the wedding day. They joke about the wedding day being for the woman, and that the honeymoon is for the man. I know people are trying to be funny, but I don't agree with it. I don't agree with it just because I don't agree with that. The Scripture doesn't agree with it. There's a lot of people who will tell the women, you've got to do your duty when it comes to your intimate life. And the Scripture doesn't agree with it. I want you to look at the way he worded this. As you're one flesh, he said, I want you, the husband, to render to the wife due benevolence. He's talking about your intimate life. The marriage bed. And he said, husbands, make sure you give your wife what she needs. You know what that implies to me? It can be good for the woman. And that they have needs. And that those needs deserve to be met. Render unto them the things that are due. And he says the same to the women. But I'll tell you this, sometimes, and it makes me so sad, I hear this preached from a standpoint, and I'm not talking about pulpits and stuff, but I hear it talked about casually of, well, you just got to do your duty. Just do your job, do your duty. Being one flesh in your sex life, it's not a duty. It's a gift. And beyond that is one of the most valuable tools that you have in having a good relationship, a good godly relationship. And think about the ways that we neglect that intimate life. Because that's what he's talking about here. You know what he started about? He's talking about avoiding fornication and adultery. And he said, let every man have his own wife. Why? Because it's not good for a man to touch a woman. So he said to avoid the fornication, you have your own spouse, and you make sure that the intimate life is good. You remember that your body is not your body, but it's your spouse's body. And their body is not their body, but it's your body. And thus you have to take care of one another, right? Esteem their body better than your own. And give to each other. How often do we practice it? Sadly, what I see often, this statement right here. The bedroom is not used as a tool, it's not used as a blessing, it's used as a weapon. If you do this, I'll do this. I don't care what it is in a marriage, that's not marriage. It's not meant to be a weapon. And in fact, he said, don't withhold it from each other. Defraud not one another. Don't keep from the other person what they need, what they deserve, what will help your marriage to be great and to be good. He said, if you do have to go without, if you do have to withhold, and how often do we practice this? Oh, didn't highlight it there. He said, I want you to consent on it, let it be mutual. And he said, and you still have to do that and you consent on it, I want you to fast and I want you to pray. I'm going to ask myself this same question in my mind, and you answer it too. When's the last time, married folks, that you had to go for a time without the blessings of your intimate life, but you spent consistent time fasting? That you spent consistent time together praying for each other? You've got to find some way to keep that bond strong. And that's what he's equipping them with there. To make sure that we still have that strong connection, because we have needs. We have desires. We have urges. We have lusts to fight. And he said to keep one another strong, make sure you practice this so that Satan doesn't tempt you for your lack of being together. Top 2 reasons for divorce, marriage separation: money and affairs. Unless it's changed over the last several years. We say affairs, it sounds a little better. You boil it all down, it's because there's something wrong in the marriage. It's not just about money. It's not just about the affair. It's because there was something wrong a long time ago. And it has something to do with the unity in the relationship. It started because as a husband and wife, we weren't giving to each other what needed to be given. And I don't know anybody. I hope I don't think I know anybody who sets out to cheat on their spouse. I mean, who does that? I know men who've cheated on their spouse. There are people in my life I grew up looking up to. I thought these are spiritual people, wise men. I thought a lot of them, and I watched them fall. I watched them destroy everything that they had to give it all away because they were willing to go be with somebody else. And they didn't just mess up their life, they messed up a bunch of people's lives. Their kids' lives, the congregation's lives, people all the way across the country. It's these little everyday things of working to be one that can keep us from that. And what we need to understand is that we're capable of something like that. You may not think that you are. Goodness, I hope that I'm not. It's hard to imagine. But you know what? I know that if I'm lazy, if I am lazy and I don't fill my wife's needs, there's somebody out there who's going to treat her good. That's one of the problems. And that's what happens a lot of times. I'm not saying it's that way every time. Somebody doesn't get taken care of, and what do? They look to someone else to fill a need. And it may not be physical at first. It may just be emotional. It may not be an intimate conversation or an inappropriate conversation at first. It may be innocent. It may be, how are you doing today? I'm all right. It may just start that way. It may be over time the conversations build and finally you're divulging secrets and telling things to somebody else that you wouldn't tell to your spouse anymore. And you give yourself over emotionally to people. And what do people say? I fell out of love, right? That's what they say. I hear that all the time. I don't love them anymore. First of all, we need to have a strong understanding that if we're willing to go and commit adultery, we don't have understanding. We lack understanding, and we just destroy our own soul. But before it ever gets to this point, we need to work on our home. We need to work on the unity of our home. We need to make sure that we're filling voids and that our wife has no need of spoil or our husband has no need of spoil. It's not just about honoring commitments, covenant that we made before God and them. It's about having something wonderful. It's about building something that's going to stand the test of time. You know, that's what God wants for our relationship with Him, doesn't He? He wants it to last forever and through it into eternity. Hebrews 3 and verse 14, he said, we are made partakers of Christ if we hold from the beginning our confidence steadfast unto the end. You know, just like our relationship with Jesus, He wants our marriage to stand strong, to stand fast, to stand up to time, to last for a good long while. We mentioned some of this verse yesterday. He said, the Pharisees came to Him in Matthew 19. They were tempting Him. They said to Him, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? Later on, He answered to them in verse 8, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And again, I'm not here to discuss this super in depth, but I think it's important what He talked about here when He said there were allowances made for ending your marriage because of your hard hearts. And that's what happens if you don't spend each and every day of your life working on becoming more at one with your spouse, is your heart gets hardened. You know what can be turned off just like a water hose? Affection, attraction, desire. Those things can be turned off just like a water faucet. We got to work to keep that going, keep that working. The desire for God was for us to stay faithful to the end, but that takes a lot of work in between it. We got to make sure that the hearts don't get hard and that we're continually knit together. We're not meant to go be with someone else and be promiscuous. We're meant to commit ourselves. And that's the idea behind one flesh. The idea of one flesh is that you're one flesh. In a literal, figurative, literal sense. You know, my body, it ain't going to live. You take a sword and slice me in half. I'm not Superman. I don't just have an Achilles heel. I mean, you cut my body in half, I'm going to die, I promise. And that's the way it ought to be with our marriage, that we're so close, that we're knit so tightly together, that we cling to one another in our cleaving, that you can't separate us. That's a good marriage. That's a happy home. That's a blessing, even to the people that we've had to change our relationships with in life. There's a natural end to it. There's lots of unnatural ends to it from the design that God originally had. The natural end still I don't think is pleasant, but you know what's better than the alternatives, I guess? Romans 7:2 said, for the woman which hath an husband is bound by the law to her husband so long as he liveth. But if the husband is dead, she is loosed from the law of her husband. You know, I don't know, my wife especially doesn't like having this conversation. Who's going to go first? She wants to go at the same time. I guess that'd be easier on both of us. She said she wants to go first or at the same time. And I don't know how that would work out for us. You hear those stories sometimes, but you know, the truth is that if one of us passes away, the other person is loosed. That was the original desire. Not a desire that someone has to live alone, but they're free to find another relationship, and that's what he's talking about. That's following the original plan and the original intent, and being one flesh means being one flesh until that one isn't with you anymore physically in this life. Goals. I think we ought to have goals for our relationship. Spiritual goals, and I can't make all those goals for you, but whenever it comes to leaving and cleaving and being knit together as one flesh, one heart, one mind, one body, I think 1 Peter 3:7 might be a good one. as he's talked through the context here to the wives earlier, and to here he says, likewise in verse 7, you husbands dwell with them according to the knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as a weaker vessel, and being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. You know, the end goal that God has for your marriage is that you inherit eternal life. Is that you spend your lifetime growing closer and closer, not just together with each other, but provoking and pushing one another to be closer with Him. And so that if, well, there's no ifs about it, there's going to be some day that one or the other in you is going to pass from this life. And the consolation that you'll be left with, maybe the only consolation you'll be left with, is that you know that they're going to spend eternity with the Father in heaven. But that only comes if we work at it. You have an opportunity, husbands, to dwell with your wives according to the knowledge, to be able to walk along through life with them, to not have your relationship hindered with God because you have a bad and poor relationship. But you have the opportunity to create in your wife a more spiritual person. Wives, you have an opportunity with your husbands as you try to draw closer and closer to them, as you build trust and they build trust with you, that you can make them more spiritually and you can push them closer and closer to heaven as that day draws near. Your marriage can be a blessing. I'm going to tell you this evening, as you look at your marriage, I hope that it is, but if you look at your marriage and you say it's not the blessing that it ought to be, maybe it's not the blessing it ought to be to you or to your spouse, maybe it's not the blessing that needs to be somebody else, to somebody else, change that with God's help. Change that with the experience of other people around you who do have good relationships and rely on God. Maybe you're not as close as you ought to be. You're not knit together. Maybe you haven't left like you ought to. Maybe you haven't cleft like you ought to and clung to that other person in your life. Cling tighter. Draw closer. Be one. If there's something in a relationship where you're not knit together, clinging together this evening, change that today. You have the opportunity. You know what? God builds blessings, not curses. And when He built marriage, whether it's for Adam or for you, He built it to be a blessing.